Now from Tel Aviv by Mark Regev, senior advisor to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Good evening to you. The hostage prisoner swap seemed to be going very smoothly. There was much relief all round, it seemed. So what happened? Was it not worth having a little more patience and try to get more hostages back?
Well, we were willing to continue with the framework. After all, we were getting people out every day, and every person that got out, their life was saved, and we saw the joy with their families. And we still have, I've got the number here, 137 hostages still inside Gaza, and all of them should be coming out too. But unfortunately, Hamas simply would not follow through on its commitments that were negotiated with the United States, with Qatar, with Egypt. They wouldn't follow through, and in fact, it was Hamas that opened fire this morning, I think at 5:30 this morning on Israel, sending rockets in. And so if we're not now in a pause and we've seen a return to fighting, it's clear that Hamas is responsible.
Yeah, and to point out, both sides have said that it was the other side first. We did see skirmishes like this throughout the truce as well, though, didn't we? I want to put to you what Hamas spokesperson Osama Hamdan has said. He says it was clear yesterday that the Israeli side wants to go back to fighting, as several ideas were put forward by mediators, and we accepted 3 of them. And despite that, the Israeli side said no, no, no every time.
This is the same Osama Hamdan who said that the attack on October 7th was against military targets. Yes? They butcher children, they burn families alive, they go into kibbutzim, into agricultural communities, and just shoot everyone they see.
So you're saying this isn't true, that these ideas weren't put to you and Israel didn't refuse them?
I'm saying that Hamas had commitments that it made, and had it kept its commitments regarding the release of hostages, we were prepared to see the continuation of the ceasefire. But not only did they not keep their commitments, and you can check this with your reporters on the ground, they opened fire. They started shooting rockets at 5:30 this morning into Israel. It's clear that Hamas violated the agreement. It's clear that Hamas started this round of fighting.
Yeah, and of course the concern is always for the civilians involved in this, not least your hostages. Israel has a policy of leaving nobody behind. This seems to be the precise opposite, though, resuming the airstrikes in Gaza where your hostages are.
I don't think that's true, and I can explain why. We believe that in applying military pressure to Hamas, that's the best way to expedite the release of hostages. Because that's exactly what happened. Hamas isn't going to suddenly become a humanitarian organization. They are brutal, fanatical terrorists, capable of the most gruesome violence. The whole world saw the sort of violence that they're capable of on October 7th. So they're not going to release hostages out of goodwill. They're going to release hostages, as President Biden said, because of pressure. And we believe that applying military pressure, as we're doing now, by attacking and destroying their military infrastructure, by eliminating their senior commanders, that is the best way to get our hostages out, because in the end, that's the only language Hamas really understands.
OK, but 200 bombs today alone. By November the 2nd, according to Euromed and several other organisations, enough bombs that were the equivalent of 2 nuclear bombs. All the while, Israeli hostages, international hostages and Palestinian civilians trapped inside Gaza in one of the most densely populated areas in the world. They are the ones that are also being targeted by these bombs, even though obviously you say you're targeting Hamas. You're using bombs that are up to £1,000-2,000 pounds. So that really isn't possible, is it, to avoid civilian casualties?
I'd like to tell you that there won't be a single civilian hurt in this conflict, because we don't want to see a single civilian hurt. But there hasn't been a war in modern history where civilians haven't been caught up in the fighting. The obligation of democratic countries like the United Kingdom, like Israel, is to minimize as much as is possible civilian casualties. And that's exactly why, just as the start of hostilities this morning, we leafleted areas where we know there will be combat. We've asked people to leave areas of danger. we've established, together with our international partners, and we've spoken to the UN about this, special zones, areas which are safer areas where people can relocate to temporarily so they can get out of harm's way.
Mr. Regev, I want to ask you specifically about that. I'm glad you brought that up, because the leaflets, we understand, have QR codes on them so that people can check where the hostilities will be, as you say, to try and avoid those areas. There's also obviously this map that you've clearly demarcated so that presumably you will tell people this is the areas to avoid, I'm assuming. You're very much, though, relying on people being able to open these QR codes or see these maps when we all know that there's been precious little internet in Gaza because of the airstrikes. It's kind of a false economy to drop these leaflets on or to create this map, because people won't be able to see. And then isn't Hamas also going to leave the area?
Hamas will probably try to leave with civilians. That's obviously the way they play their tactics. They hide under civilians. They deliberately build their military structure, their terrorist network, under hospitals, under schools, under civilian areas. That we know. That's why we have to ask sometimes civilians to leave areas. And I know it's difficult to leave. I understand. There's a war going on and it's difficult. We've had to move hundreds of thousands of Israelis away from border areas in my country.
My point is not any of that. It's that this system that you've employed of avoiding civilian casualties really won't work. It seems more of just a ticking a box move rather than avoiding civilian casualties. Okay, fair enough. Let's move on then. So we are where we are at. The truce is over. What happens next? Where is this all heading? How will this end? And when will this end? Your stated aim is to eliminate Hamas. You haven't managed that in over a month of hostilities now, almost two. What next?
So, like a lot of battles, it's not quick. It will take time. But we have a model. And that's the model you were involved in, Britain. When ISIS had territorial control over places in Iraq and in Syria, there was a coalition of countries, and they had what they called their caliphate. Yes, they controlled territory, huge chunks of territory. And you led an international coalition, and you destroyed ISIS's territorial control. And Iraq and Syria are both better places without ISIS. And I want to say that we intend to do the same in Gaza. Gaza will be better off without Hamas. And we should ask the following question. What has Hamas bought the people of Gaza? They've been in power for 16 years. What have they bought them? Just bloodshed,
sure, but presumably the way
poverty.
To get rid of Hamas was to empower, I mean, this is a political debate, but to empower the Palestinian people, to empower the Palestinian Authority. It's widely known that Prime Minister Netanyahu had a long-term policy of empowering Hamas over the Palestinian Authority.
That's not true. I don't know why you say that. Widely known.
There are quotes from Prime Minister Netanyahu.
It's not true. It's not true.
Okay.
But I would say the following.
You can say that there are quotes out there from Prime Minister Netanyahu, from speeches he himself has made. I also want to ask you, while we have you, you say Hamas has embedded themselves inside the Gazan territory amongst the people, using them as human shields. Well, that's almost inevitable, isn't it, with any terror group anywhere in the world? We've seen that throughout the world. Of course, the United Kingdom had a long issue with the IRA, and finally we managed the Good Friday Agreement here. Even during the targeting of ISIS, which you liken Hamas to, the United States, a staunch ally of Israel, was reluctant to drop bombs the size that Israel is using on civilian areas, and Gaza is more densely populated.
The truth is, we've sat with American officials and we've internally looked at the numbers of civilians who were killed when you were fighting ISIS, both in places like Fallujah and Mosul. And we are convinced, and you can check our numbers if you like, but when this is over and the numbers are clear, we believe that it'll be very self-evident that the IDF's measures to get civilians out of harm's way have actually worked. And that because we're all listening to Hamas propaganda and they're controlling the numbers coming out of Gaza, we're all convinced that the opposite is true. Frankly, I think we'll do very well. And it's not just computers and smartphones. We've been dropping leaflets. We've been making phone calls. There are radio broadcasts. The population of Gaza who wants to get out of harm's way, and it's not everyone. We've specified specific locations where we know there will be heavy fighting. They know where they need to go. And the humanitarian organizations have also been notified. And so we want to see tents there. We want to see field hospitals. We want to see, of course, food and water and medicine for people going to these areas. It's common sense. If there's going to be heavy fighting, civilians should move out of dangerous areas. That happens in Syria. That happened in the fighting in Ukraine.
As we've said repeatedly, we're going to go round in circles, Mr. Regev, because obviously it's the most densely populated area on Earth. I hope we can speak again. It's good to have you here on Sky News. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.